do the forward and back. The program started a couple of years ago, and some people may know I'm addicted to eBay and looking for Yellow Springs artifacts on eBay, and I came across a patent one day, a really interesting patent, which I'll show you, but that was had been issued to a man in Yellow Springs in the 1870s, late 1860s, early 1870s. No patent number, and someone had been obviously found this patent, thought it was interesting, and was selling copies, but had removed all traces to the Patent and Trademark registration office registration number, so I couldn't find the original patent. But I was really curious about this thing, so I did some research, talked to some of the patent lawyers that I practice law with. I'm not a patent lawyer, by the way, so you can't ask me any hard questions. But, how could I search the patent records? Well, it turns out that the online patent records only go back to, for full searching back to the 1970s. So if I want to search by anything other than patent number, I couldn't just like look for Yellow Springs and so forth. So I came to a dead end because this was obviously before that date. But in recent years, along with all of its other projects, Google has now got a product called Google Patents. And it's still a little rough, and some of their digitalization of the patent records isn't all that great, but as far as typos and that sort of thing, so sometimes the names come up strange. But it was a windfall, because now all of a sudden, instead of working, I could put in, during the day in the computer at work, Yellow Springs into the Google Patents, and I started finding all sorts of things. And I thought, well, this is going to be interesting to find out how long the village has really had a creative history in the sense of inventions that result in patents. And it got a little carried away, and what I've found so far, and I don't think it's complete, is a notebook full of patents going back to 1855, before the village was even incorporated. And so one of the things that meant is that there's way too much interesting material, because Sharon will tell you I sometimes tend to take side roads, and it takes a while to get to the main destination. And there's a lot of side roads in these patents when you start looking at the inventors involved, the products, and what was going on. And so what I've done, and this may be a disappointment to some people, but for this program, I've concentrated on the 19th century, the early 20th century, and what happened starting in probably the 1930s as a result of the changes at Antioch College and so forth is just an explosion of inventiveness in this town. And so I'll touch on a few patents that were issued after the 1930s, but the whole atmosphere and what was going on and what came out of all of that work at Antioch in particular, and also Wright-Patterson, deserves another program, and hopefully we'll do that in the future. And just to show that importance, this is from a 1962 Dayton Daily News article. And at that point, and you got to think 50 years ago, what dollar value was 50 years ago. In 1962, they were reporting that Chuck Colbert's Westgate Labs had 36 employees, $300,000 of revenues a year. Vernay had $3 million of revenues per year, 250 employees. Morris Bean had 400 employees in town. YSI, 50 employees and $600,000 in revenue. Webb and Associates was active. Fell's Lab had 58 researchers. Kettering Foundation had 22 researchers. So things were really going on in the inventive field in Yellow Springs in the 1960s. So, like I say, we'll cover that just barely today, but that's a matter for another day and another program, hopefully. And inventions can mean all sorts of things, but what I'm concentrating on is inventions that led to patents. And partly because those records are available. We can find out what kind of inventions were done here just because of the patent record that's been left. And the idea of a patent goes back clear to the United States Constitution, which provided that Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. what that's really saying is if, in order to encourage invention, creative thinking, writing, the government will give you what's effectively a monopoly or the exclusive right to practice your invention. If you make it public, you register it with the Patent and Trademark Office so the rest of the world can eventually be able to use it once your patent's expired. To be patentable, an invention must be new. So you can't patent something somebody already has patented. Non-obvious. Now, some of these, you'll wonder about the non-obvious part of it. And useful, you wonder about the usefulness of a few of these inventions we'll see. But those are the keys. Although with design patents, the last one, the usefulness is really replaced by a decorative function that may not be functional. Patent term, generally 20 years, so that's the exclusive period of time. And we'll start off with the very first patent that I've been able to find so far that was issued to someone who was residing in Yellow Springs, so that it gives a Yellow Springs address. And it was to two men that we don't know a whole lot about, Robert W. Davis and Daniel Davis. They were part of that wave of immigrants that came into Yellow Springs around the time the college was started. They came from upstate New York, like a lot of other people. In their case, it was Dundee, New York. Robert Davis was a charter member of the Presbyterian Church, but he was suspended. He and his wife's membership were suspended after a year because they were advocating spiritualism. So they basically got kicked out of the church. And this was a patent on a parallel vice. I am not only not a patent lawyer, I am a political science and history major, so I'm not an engineer, so some of these explanations will be a little rough and probably non-existent, but I'll do what I can do. The concept here was, instead of a normal vise, like a bench vise you see, where there would be a screw that would open and close that vise, this was done with this lever action and this post here. And the idea was you could open and close it faster than it would take to screw in a screw. And at all times, because of the way this works, those jaws stay parallel. They don't get out of kilter because even though it's being moved on this side, they're keeping them parallel all the time. Now, this was apparently an interesting enough invention at the time that it made the Scientific American. So the very first patent issued to an inventor in Yellow Springs made Davis's patent parallel vise right there. And it's described in this article, which you probably can't read, as a vise that would preserve its parallelism without being expensive and complicated. It has long been a desideratum with mechanics. So we've got to guess that the Davises had some mechanical background, but we don't know. The other thing that was really interesting about this Scientific American article is that, again, you can't see, but right here it says that if you're interested in this, address your letters to General Agent William Schofield, Yellow Springs, Ohio. And Schofield will show up in a couple of other things. Don't know much about him, but we'll see him again in a couple of contexts. Well, the Davises had a couple of patents, and here's another one that's a jack. So again, I've got to think they're practical engineers, mechanics, whatever you want to call them. And the mechanics was probably the common term at the time, issued in 1857. And a third one, which I think is interesting, and Scott Sanders, who I owe a lot to on this program, because he helped me with some leads on individuals, with some photographs we'll see later on, and just also his obvious great background in Yellow Springs history. He tells me that when the Linkard elevator was torn down, there were some papers that had something to do with this invention in there, he thinks. But this was an invention for addressing newspapers. Now, how they get from jacks and vices to this, but each address would be on a separate wooden block. It was on this belt, and the belt would move around. You'd step on this pedal right here. and that would lift this up, lift the newspapers coming through here, lift it up, and basically imprint it. So you could run newspapers through fairly quickly and put the individual address and mailing addresses on them. Whether this was associated with a newspaper, there was a newspaper, which I don't even know if any copies exist, but there was a newspaper in Yellow Springs at this time, so whether they were connected with that in some way, I don't really know. In the Davises, this one trace I found of Robert Davis is right here. This is on the cone map of Yellow Springs from 1855, I want to say 56, something in there. And this property, this is Xenia Avenue, Walnut Street, Mills Lawn, and so right behind, probably not far from where we are now. Well, another patent, early patent that had a connection with Yellow Springs, but it's tough to say it was invented in Yellow Springs, but Yellow Springs definitely has a connection with it, is this one, photographic pictures on Japan surfaces, issued to H.L. Smith of Gambier, William Neff and Peter Neff Jr. of Cincinnati, Ohio. Well, that should be the connection. The Neff name should start ringing a bell. This is the patent for what we would call today a tintype, the tintype. It was the first patent issued in the United States for tintype, which is a photograph taken on a piece of metal where it's coated with a collodion and exposed. It was cheap to make, very popular from about this time. This was 1850, my eyes are bad, 56 maybe, 55, sometime right in there. And from then until probably the middle of the Civil War, it was a popular form of photography. And the Neffs, in 1842, William Mills and Elisha Mills, his father, had sold their resort at the Yellow Springs and built the Yellow Springs house, which was on the site of where Bryan Center is today. They sold it to a man named William Neff, a manufacturer from Cincinnati. And his son Peter was Peter Neff Jr. Well, Peter Neff was a student at Kenyon, graduated from Kenyon, then went back to Kenyon and was working on his divinity degree at a theological school that was associated with Kenyon. And he met H.L. Smith of Gambier, where Kenyon is, who was a professor at Kenyon, and together they worked on developing this photography process, which supposedly, and I didn't see the original source for this, but I found a pretty good article that talks about the origins of it. The deal was, if Smith would patent it, then the Neffs would have the exclusive right to manufacture the plates that they were going to sell and make their fortune with on the tintypes. And in fact, Peter Neff eventually founded a factory in Cincinnati to make these plates. But Neff, probably because of his father using what had been the resort at the Springs as a summer house, basically, and where he entertained and so forth, because of that connection, after he graduated from theology school, Peter Neff moved to Yellow Springs, and his first job was was preaching at the Presbyterian Church here in Xenia. And while he was here, he obviously was experimenting with this technique, because if you go to the Smithsonian today, and I wish I had a copy of it to show you, the oldest known tintype photograph is titled Tom the Yellow Springs Boy. And it's one of the waiters at the hotels. And Don Hustler, a number of years ago, found this at the Smithsonian, and it's taken probably about 1856 of a young boy, probably a waiter, with just a sheet hanging behind him, but it's the oldest known tintype photograph taken in Yellow Springs, which is pretty cool. This is just, yes?
I just wanted to know whether this was like the very beginning of tintype.
It was. It really was. And in fact, there's a whole, all these side roads, we could have separate programs on, so you got to be careful here, but getting me started. But there was from another part of Ohio, there was a man who had a competing tintype, and there was these tintype wars basically over the two patented processes. But the early tintypes, and I've seen them, that were made with this patented process are actually stamped on the tintype Neff's patent 1856. And actually, they referred to it as a melanotype. That was their trade name for it. Here is the official notice of the issuance of that. I just thought it was pretty interesting. Because there's a picture of the patent on the old patent office, which is still standing today. It's the National Portrait Gallery. Not as good a copy as it should, but here's an example of a tintype. They tend to be a little dark because they're on metal that have been japanned, which is to put a black surface on it. But you'll find lots of Civil War soldiers, for example, as pictures, especially from the early part of the war. The pictures were taken on tintypes. And this, of course, is the old resort at the Yellow Springs that by this time William Neff had purchased as a summer house, and where Peter probably was doing some of his experimenting. Well, another early Yellow Springs man was Julius Cone, and this I thought was an interesting invention. 1856, still pretty early. Yellow Springs was incorporated. The village was actually formally incorporated in 1856. And this is an alarm lock for a drawer. And it was a mechanism where you turned this wheel and you set it, and you remember how many clicks you turned it. And so if you were the one who set it, you could, by turning the knob on the drawer, you could set that click and open it fine. But if you weren't the one who had set it, you wouldn't know how many clicks to do it. You'd pull the knob to open the drawer, and it would. There's a spring in here, and it started hitting this bell. So pretty clever invention. And here, this is from what I referred to a few minutes ago as a Cone map, that early map of Yellow Springs. And here's Julius Cone right here. What's interesting about him, given the patent we just talked about, he was not only a surveyor, he made the map, but he was a daguerrean. So he took daguerreotypes, which was the earliest form of photographs, on a silver plate, very expensive to make, but extremely high quality. I mean, they've got a depth of field to them that even modern photography is hard to meet. There's another man on here that I'm real curious about. I haven't found much about him yet, but this J.A. Brown. And see, these were people who gave money basically to have the map printed. And Brown may have been a lawyer. I'm not sure, because there is a Brown that's hard to make out, but a Brown who was the attorney on a number of these early patents. So maybe being a good lawyer who was out stirring up work and trying to get people in town to file patents. There was another daguerrean artist right here, W.B. Huffman. I've never found or seen a daguerreotype attributed to Yellow Springs, but obviously they were here taking them at the time in the 1850s. Another man who I haven't been able to find his connection to Yellow Springs, other than he clearly in 1859 patented this watch mechanism. Don Mozart was his name, and he was a clock inventor or a watch inventor, and somehow he ended up in not upstate New York, in New York, and I think Connecticut as well, with a company called the New York Watch Company. First it was called the Mozart Watch Company, then it was the New York Watch Company, then it became the Hamden Watch Company, and eventually part of a very large watch manufacturing company that was in Canton, Ohio, moved to Canton, Ohio, called Duber Hamden. It was one of the largest watch companies in the world back before the Depression. How he got it to Yellow Springs, how long he was here, what he was doing here, I don't have the faintest idea. I just haven't been able to find the research. I did find, though, a reference to his wife in 1876. He must have passed away by this time, in Ann Arbor, and they're talking about her, but they refer to her as the wife of the well-known crazed inventor. So, there's got to be another story there. Well, another story, a series of patents. When you think about Yellow Springs, this boom town, it went from about 120 people in the early 1840s to about 1,000 people by the time of the Civil War. So it's really booming. It's really exploding in growth, and especially in the 1850s with the coming of the railroad in 1846, and then the coming of Antioch in 1852. Mill's vision for this new city, forest village, as he called it, was really starting to boom. What did you need? We got lots, and lots of them still standing today, the brick houses. And so there was a huge need for bricks. And there were a couple of large brick manufacturers in town. One of them, down south on Xenia Avenue, which is that beautiful Greek Revival house that the Struings are restoring right now. But another one is farther north in town that I'll show you in a minute, the man by the name of King, who was tied to this. But Hotchkiss seems to have been the inventor among the brick people, and he's got at least 4 or 5 inventions for brick machines of various kinds, either alone or with a man by the name of Ezra Buss, who was also from Yellow Springs. And in fact, I found this in a report of the Ohio Department of Agriculture in 1868, so after the Civil War. And I think all these machines were basically refinements or different parts of what became to be this Hotchkiss and Bliss patented brick machine. And if you ever had, when you were a kid, one of those Play-Doh fun factories where you put the Play-Doh in and you pump it and it comes out, it's extruded into a shape. This is basically what this was. You could run this thing by steam power or by horsepower, and it would go around. It would he's going to shovel clay into it, wet clay and water. It's going to come down through here, and then through this mechanism, it's going to push it through dies. In this kind of case, it's extruding these long brick-shaped sections of clay, I guess, and then they've got wire mechanisms that he's just coming down through the wet clay and cutting it into brick shape. He's going to put them on the trailer here, and then they'll take them over and fire them to make them tough. Well, so this was Hotchkiss, and somehow he was associated with a man by the name of William King, and this has gotten me fairly interested. King came also from upstate New York, like a lot of the early settlers in Yellow Springs, and he had this place. You can see it. Here's Fairfield Pike. Let's see. I think get my streets right. Is that Winter, or is that
Stafford?
Stafford. That's Stafford, which at the time was called Summer to go with Winter. It wasn't called Stafford all the way through up here. And he had this. Well, it looks like gardens. I mean, it doesn't rival Mills's place on the map, but it must have been a pretty nice place. He built this house. We know that. I'd love to find a picture. If anybody knows where there's a picture, because this was sold to the Dye family. He lost his money, according to a report in the Yellow Springs News after the turn of the century, because he became associated with Mr. Hotchkiss in his brick-making machine and lost his money, basically lost his shirt promoting the machine. And so this was owned by, or sold to a family called Dye, who I think the house may have been standing up until the 1940s at least. Because in our little ghost story book that we published a few years ago, one of the stories is I think it's the Dachshunds. Do you remember, Becky? And it happens.
I think it was the Dachshunds on Fairfield Pike.
And it was a series of articles that had been written by Harold Igo in the Yellow Springs News in the 1940s, and he refers to it taking place at the old Dye place, which is what this place was. So that's our brick making history. But King himself had one patent, and maybe it's because of what happened with his brick making experience, but he came up with basically an improved still. King, by the way, supplied the brick for what was originally the Christian church, now the Catholic church in town, and he supplied some of the brick for the college as well. And Buss, who was the partner with Hotchkiss on a lot of these inventions, must have had a more domestic side because he came up in 1861 with a clothes dryer.
I actually own one of those, and it's called a dry rite of all things.
Oh, is that right? That's amazing. I wonder if it's based on his patent.
It's
Could be.
exactly that design.
That's amazing. So this was 1861, and maybe this was more successful than the brick making machines. Let's see here. Well, I mentioned Schofield. Schofield was actually an assignee on one of the early brick making machine patents. You know, I mentioned him earlier as being the agent for the Davises on their vise. And he was also associated with this company, Yellow Springs Agricultural Works. See, William H. Schofield, general agent. It's hard to find much about this company, but Mills's vision for the town was a good, mix of education, transportation, and with the railroad. He actually promoted churches. He supported all the churches in town, and manufacturing. And he and his friend Dr. Thorne built this manufacturing facility about 1855, and I'll show you in a second where it was located. But it was a large 3-story building, and this Dane, or actually eventually became Dane Ewing and Company, manufactured agricultural implements there. We'll see that all through the last part of the 1800s and well into the 1900s, probably the single largest number of patents that were issued to people living in Yellow Springs were agricultural related, agricultural equipment of one kind or another. And we think some of the early ones, although we can't find the connection, I'll show you in a second, some of the inventions probably were associated with this because they were a fairly large manufacturing company. It didn't last very long though. This burnt in 1860. I'll show you in a second. It burned in 1860, and it was a big enough fire, $70,000 worth of loss, that it actually made the New York Times. Although New York Times is listing probably for business reasons because they're showing what insurance companies were actually holding the insurance on it. But Sharon, you can guess. Yeah. So you can see they're making everything: plows, cultivators, harrows, drills, churns, cheese presses, corn shellers, all sorts of great stuff. It's hard to find much about them though. And we think after the fire that Dane at least, and maybe the others of the company, moved to Springfield and restarted in Springfield. But here's the college, here's the Glen, and here's the Yellow Springs Agricultural Works. So basically, on what's the golf course now?
So it's close to the theater department?
Yeah, you'd have to. Could be. I'm not sure it's that far down, but maybe so. Maybe it is. My perspective isn't exactly right there. So interesting. And I said a minute ago that we can't connect this man, this George Yost, but about the time that these things were, that company was active, he started patenting all these various improvements on agricultural equipment. And so I've got to think he had some connection with it, but whether he was just a mechanic, an engineer that worked there, or it's totally possible he had no connection at all. But here's a corn planter that had this radial arm and would drop the seed, and it was a check row planter so that you were getting even placement of the seed. Here's a cotton cultivator, presumably not made for local use, so they must have been exporting their equipment to the south. And these see the blades are sitting up there, and they can be flipped over. No, actually, I'm still not saying that right, because that's looking down on it. But the blades are made so the implements are made so you can remove them and change their angle and put on different ones when you're when you don't need them. Here's a shovel plow, adjustable shovel plow that he came up with, and probably 3 or 4 other different ones. Well, in the days before electricity, you couldn't live without without lanterns. And a guy by the name of William Rosecrans, whose brother was a Catholic bishop in Cincinnati, and he had been to West Point and actually was running a coal, I have trouble saying this, coal oil plant in Cincinnati, which exploded before the Civil War. Went on to go back into the Army, first with the Ohio militia, and eventually as a general, major general in the U.S. Army, and served very well until he lost the Battle of Chickamauga in 1863. But he, along with another general, had moved their families to Yellow Springs at the beginning of the war, and probably because he was trying to sell coal oil, he came up with this invention. The problem, coal oil was cheap, but the problem with it was real smoky and real smelly. And so his invention was a new way of raising the wick in a coal oil lamp to keep it burning cleaner and less smellier, I guess. And so he came up with this improvement. And interestingly, there's a picture of him in his Civil War uniform. And here's where he lived.
We'll say whose house it is now.
Well, they're here, they can say.
Future's house.
So this made the another one that made the Scientific American, and this article about his new improvement, and oh, I know what I was going to say. The patent is actually, it shows the residence of the inventors, this Platt, Dr. Platt, and Rosecrans of Cincinnati. But by the time this article appears in late 1861 in Scientific American, the letter here is dated Yellow Springs, Ohio. So Rosecrans has moved to Yellow Springs, and in fact, it says that for more information, contact Platt and Dr. Platt in Yellow Springs. And I don't know. I've not found anything about him at all, so I don't know what his connection was, other than he's listed as a lawyer on the patent. So another story that requires some investigation. But the article is talking about, and it's actually Rosecrans promoting it himself, because he wrote the letter to the Scientific American and says, after more than 4 years' labor and expenditure of more than $1,500 in experiments, we've come up with this improvement that can be used for all sorts of oil, not just coal oil. He mentions that he's, of course, because he wants this published, he's been a reader of the Scientific American for many years, and that he just thought they might find this interesting, as he had just returned home after 6 months, home to Yellow Springs after 6 months, and found that the patent had been issued. Well, the whole world, or at least all the United States reading this would have known the reason he had been gone for 6 months is because he had been campaigning in the initial campaigns of the Civil War in Western Virginia. Well, while we're on sort of military topics, here's an interesting one. It was issued after the Civil War to a man who, Samuel McCulloch, who was interesting in that he was a gunsmith, undertaker, cabinet maker, so he could at least handle all sort of the end of life sorts of things. But this is a way of converting. I think it's interesting. It doesn't seem very practical to me, but it's interesting of converting a double-barrel shotgun, shotgun being smooth barrels, to a combination shotgun and rifle. And it's basically, you have a separate rifle barrel that you can screw into one of the shotgun barrels, and a rifle has grooves to spin the bullet and give it more range and more accuracy. Okay.
You can buy guns today with 2 barrels, one is a rifle and one is a shotgun.
I bet you can't buy one that you can screw
Outside?
in.
Outside.
Well, what's interesting though is the county history said that this found great favor with deer hunters, as a comment on his write-up in the county history. So this one may have been produced. It's hard to imagine. If anybody knows of one or finds one, I'd love to see it. So, and it wasn't so surprising that he was both a undertaker and a cabinet maker, because usually the two came together in the 19th century because of the coffins. And we know where he lived. McCulloch lived in this house, which of course still stands, built in 1850. He built it in 1855 on Dayton Street. Okay, it's obvious this was not invented by anybody from Yellow Springs. It was invented by somebody from Xenia. And it's a new invention in alarm clocks. And basically what happens when this clock, when the alarm goes off, this mechanism has a match in it, in a grit area. It hits the match in the grit and lights this lamp. So as your house is burning down, you'll definitely get up. And that might be something that my stepson could use. The Stevensons, some of these inventions obviously were parts of large business enterprises. Some of them were coming out of just good ideas, or what the inventor thought was a good idea that he'd come up with. Some of them were small tradespeople who had, in the conduct of their trade, come up with a good idea and decided to patent it. And that's the case here. W.J. and D.W. Stevenson. David Stevenson was actually, for many, many years, a tinsmith, working with tin in Yellow Springs, and William was his father. And nothing to do with the tin shop, so he may have financed, the application for this patent. And so, as a tinsmith and a stove person, he came up with this idea for a shelf that would go around the stovepipe, and it was just supported by the pipe itself, and with these little cabinets in it. And he was 24 at the time, so a good idea probably from practicing his trade, and they came into, whether it ever sold any, I couldn't tell you. Now this is the first entry for a man that will go down as one of the more prolific inventors in Yellow Springs, William Carr. And there are several Carrs, and I have trouble keeping all the Carrs straight in the genealogy, so I can't tell you which one relates to whom. But William had a number of different inventions, and Thaddeus Carr did as well. This is for again, that agricultural theme is for an attachment that goes onto your threshing machine, or as they say, thrashing machine, to make sure that the stacks go out and are nice even stacks. And in fact, the patent application even shows, this is the most technical straw stacking drawing I've ever seen, but it relates to the patent. It tells where the stuff is flying through there, and each one of these is lettered as far as where it's coming down in this nice, neat straw stack. So interesting. And William Carr made several, or applied for several patents on agricultural equipment. Here's another one for an improvement on a thrashing machine. And you had to list. You go through, and the patent's very technical, and it'll explain how everything works, because somebody has to review that and make sure that, go back to prior art, make sure it hasn't already been invented, isn't already patented, and in fact they have to sort of know that it's going to work too, that it does what it says it does. So you go through this long description relating to all these letters about what's doing what, and then you come down at the end of your patent and you list the specific things that are novel, because remember I said at the beginning, it has to be novel or new. And he's 4 or 5 different things in this threshing machine that are new or novel that he's claiming. Now, where he got his expertise in threshing machines, because this is obviously very technical and a lot of improvements. I don't know. Haven't been able to figure out that yet. But he came up with 4 or 5 other different inventions, including one that is great for the drawings with running gear on farm wagons. Well, Thaddeus Carr, who may have been William's brother, I'm not sure, was Antioch student. He's right here, and this is the famous photograph of the 1869 Antioch College baseball team that had the honor of being shellacked by the Cincinnati Reds in the first year that Cincinnati had the very first all-professional baseball team in the United States. This is our well-known captain of the team and pitcher, who was Hugh Taylor Birch. Well, Carr was, and Scott Sanders can explain more about this, but Carr was a musician as well as a baseball player, and for many, many years apparently was a well-known piano tuner in town, and he had several patents on improvements on pianos. And Scott thinks, although I've not found independent evidence, but Scott thinks that these were actually put into use. So whether we just don't know very much. Thad Carr also has the single, in my view, best invention that ever's come out of Yellow Springs, but we'll have to wait till the end. And it's the one that got me started in the first place, but we'll have to start. As far as just, I think, mechanically beautiful inventions, this man was Abdale, a great biblical name. Abdale Kyler was a Miami Township farmer, and he was 69 when this was patented. And you got to wonder if he was. It's the only patent that I can find that he's done. So you wonder if he hadn't been thinking about this for a long time. And it's a weight-driven motor, and it's similar to the way the weights will operate a grandfather's clock. Wind them up, and the weights coming down will provide the energy to move the clock. This was intended to be used for pumps or for light machines around the farm, and I just think it's really cool to see, though. Whether there was ever more than the one example that he came up with, I couldn't tell you, but he'd obviously built it at one time. I think it's just a really neat looking machine. Okay, here's one I know very little about the people, but is one of the few I can prove to you actually was manufactured. And Cassad, it's an old Miami Township family. And again, this is, as far as I can tell, the only patent he came up with, patent in 1883, and it's a plug tobacco cutter. And this is probably out of whack here. I don't know if I can do it while I'm holding it, but it's got a blade here, and this will turn and like a guillotine blade that'll cut your tobacco. And this was he probably sold this idea to Sorg Tobacco Company, which was down in Middletown. It was a very, very large national tobacco company. Southwest Ohio was one of the largest tobacco manufacturing regions in the country. And this one is cast on it. It says P.J. Sorg and Company. But on the bottom, it's got T.F. Cassad, patentee, Yellow Springs, Ohio. Another one, this one, I heard rumors that there was one of these chairs in town and sold at an auction a number of years ago. Whether it really did or not, I don't know, and I've never seen it or been able to prove it. But this was by a man named G.W. Large, who again, another guy I don't know a lot about. But it's a flexible back rocking chair, and basically it was thin wood on which there's separate slats, and those slats would give it, and that thin backing would give us some flexibility while still giving you support on this rock. And the only thing I know about Large is stereo view photographs of this area in Clifton and Xenia. They're all marked Gano and Clark, photographer, Springfield, G.W. Large, general agent, Yellow Springs, Ohio. So he was an agent for these basically for tourists, stereo views for the most part. And whether he had a store or what his real connection, we haven't been able to find him in directories or anything to really nail down what it was what he did. Another, I think this is a great invention that came out of Yellow Springs. Somebody by the name of Hirsch came up, again, the only invention I can find, but it's an automatic door stop. And, 1889, and it's made so that the door shuts against the door stop, this button right here. Well, the button activates the spring if you push it all the way back, and this rod here springs out like that and clips the door. So you push the door back against it, it automatically comes out and will hold the door from closing again, and then you can just unlock it, release the spring, and push that back in, and then it can open again. Or you can lock it, and it just acts as a doorstop. Pretty clever invention, which could well have been invented. An important invention for Yellow Springs was a couple of inventions that were issued. This is just one of them. Issued to John Curry, who was actually in Yellow Springs, I think, when he got this patent, but also lived in Springfield, so I'm not quite sure where his real residences were. But this was a patent for both the process of manufacturing a dry cereal and the makeup of the dry cereal as well. Now, the makeup of the dry cereal is sort of interesting because it's a combination of rice and ground corn, and he talks in the patent about doing this. It's rice is more expensive, at least in this area, and so it gives it the flavor of rice and the texture of rice, but you can use a cheap filler like corn to make it go farther and less expensive to produce. Well, this is what it turned into. This was the American Hominy Flake Company that was put it together to manufacture that breakfast cereal that Curry had come up with. A guy by the name of Little here in Yellow Springs. If you recognize where this was, this is basically where Peaches was. There's the Linkard elevator that's now gone right here in the railroad. This didn't last long. They had some financial problems, and it burnt when in the late 1890s when that whole section of town burned. But here's an example of the Snowflake Hominy Box, Little Brothers and Curry. See, so at this point at least they're selling with Curry, Yellow Springs, Ohio. This is sometimes referred to as the first breakfast cereal. I don't think it actually is the first prepackaged breakfast cereal, but it's certainly one of the earliest ones. So Little Brothers and Curry, Yellow Springs, Ohio. Sole manufacturers. Well, we're now up to, what is that, 1893, and the first invention that I've been able to come up with by a woman, a patent issued to a woman. And interestingly enough, Sarah Shigley, who I think was not surprisingly given the invention, lived on a farm northeast of town. And she came up with interchangeable blades for a hoe and a rake that you could just change the blades and use the same handle for. So that's the first, and there haven't been a lot, quite frankly, of female inventors that have gotten patents. This man is, in a town full of eccentrics, probably the most famous eccentric we've ever had, John Bryan. John Bryan had all sorts of interesting characteristics, but he was also an inventor. He owned the farm that would become Bryan Park, which was, when he owned it, was called Riverside Farm. He bought the property after the Yellow Springs house burnt in 1912. He bought the property he was located on, or maybe even owned it at that point, and gave it eventually to the village for the use of Bryan's school on a condition that no religion ever be practiced there. The state, for many, many years, didn't want to take the Bryan Park property because he had insisted that the deed provided that no religion would be practiced there. But he came up with some interesting inventions. This one is a ram pump. Is a pump that works by running water through it, sort of like a waterfall, and it'll pump water, back uphill. There was a ram pump in the dam at DeWine's Pond, and that would pump water from the pond back up to a water tower that was behind our house. But typically those were built into the dam, so you needed a dam across the stream in order to do it. Brian's invention was, we'll do away with the dam. We'll create our waterfall, our drop in water, by digging a hole, which could be right next to the stream wherever you wanted it, and we'll run the water down into the hole, so we get the drop from just stream level down into the hole through the ram pump, and then we'll have this sort of well here with a suction siphon, I guess is the right word, a siphon device to siphon the water back out. And the idea was the siphon would keep the water out, so the water's running through here constantly, but that the siphon, once it got primed, would continuously pull the water out of the hole, and so you could put this water pump any place you wanted to.
David, do you know if any were installed in Yellow Springs area?
I don't know. My guess is at least he had one. I'm sure he must have had some experience with it. This one, I'm not sure if it meets the criteria of obvious, but he says, you know, the patent says we've got problems where streams in flood times, especially where there's oxbows or bends, the water sort of piles up and floods the areas. So we're going to, this is a way of making the stream flow more directly in times of flood. So basically it was like a trench between the bends of the arms of the bends of the streams that normally wouldn't carry water, but in times of flood it was like a floodway or a wasteway, which I thought was sort of interesting, and you wonder what made him come up with that particular idea. He also had 2 or 3 other patents. Well, we mentioned the cars before. Here's that car back again with another invention. This isn't my favorite one yet, but this one seems to me like it. I'm just guessing, but it may have come up from some bad personal experiences. This is 1907, and it's a telephone system, and it's Charles and Thad, and it's for party lines, and it's a system so that the operator, when she puts a call through to the party line, first, not all the lines ring, so everybody can't pick it up and listen. Then it closes off the lines to the people who the call is not directed to, so they can't listen. Plus, it gives them a little signal so that they know that it's being used for that. So it's basically to make a party line work like a private line. And so you wonder, being in a small town with a lot of party lines, whether he'd had some bad experiences. And this is really the first, I would say, of the electrical related devices patents. This is the first of a long stream of those kinds of devices that were patented by people from Yellow Springs. And actually, this is going to take us from here out. I'm going to go fairly quickly, because this is the part where I think it needs a lot more study. There are just an incredible number of patents, and also a lot of really interesting things going on that have a lot to do with the college. But I just pulled a few to show some examples. This is a device by a man by the name of Albert Burden, who was associated with the Antioch, and this particular, he had several inventions, but this particular patent is for recording faint electronic signals or electric signals or radio signals, and in particular for radio code, he writes up in the application so that you could record faint radio signals that were coming in. But I don't have a photograph of that. I do have a photograph of another instrument that he made that's at Antioch College, I think still, that he built, and it's called a, Hardy, you may have to help me on some of this stuff. It's a Wheatstone bridge, and it's a device for measuring resistance. You put things across these gaps, I guess, and measure resistance. But this was made personally by Burden. Well, here's a patent that employed a lot of people in Yellow Springs for a lot of years. Sergius Vernet's thermistor, a device for using temperature to control equipment. There's a picture of him. Another one of a series of patents by Morris Bean of primarily on how to make molds, how to cast metal and make the molds that you use to cast the metals. Morris Bean was a pioneer in tire molds. I like that picture. Yeah. Measuring out, and his wife Zarifa had patents of her own, in the same general field of casting technology. This is the longest patent that I could find issued to someone from Yellow Springs, and actually there were 4 or 5 different inventors. Konstantin Barbalescu, if I pronounced it right, hopefully, who this was an early patent, and it was interesting because it was filed in 1939, but it wasn't granted until 1943. But basically for radio control of airplanes landing and taking off at airports. It's all the automatic control, so we're autopilot, if you will, where it's using radio controls to bring the planes in and to allow them to be taken off. There's a series of stations with sending out the radio waves as part of the system.
He wound up being professor of electrical engineering at Abbott.
Okay, good. About what period? Around this time?
Roughly, probably 38, 39, through 1954, 55. So.
Okay.
Federico?
There's this picture. Another man from Yellow Springs who has a number of patents, Paul Nosker, and this particular one, I like the picture basically. Obviously, he was associated with, I believe, with the materials command at Wright Pat, and this particular patent is for this device for launching aerial torpedoes from an aircraft, a mother aircraft, or it could be an aircraft, could be, I suppose, a dirigible even, but it's the whole system of bringing these torpedoes up, using an electrical starter to get them started, igniting the explosives in them, dropping them down through these doors on which they were resting, and then these little carts, and then launching them like that. There's a picture of him. I found actually a popular science article that mentions Nosker and Lear, the famous Learjet inventor, as coming up with some of the first uses of cameras for control of aircraft. A man who had fewer patents in what I call normal patents, but a number of design patents is Reed Beemeister. And these again are as much for looks as function, but that's what he was famous for. Here's a lawnmower, designed for a lawnmower that was assigned to Huffman Manufacturing Company in Dayton. What became Huffy. There's a combined thermometer and scratch pad holder. I've got something a little close to that on the desk. And a watering can. Another. I'd like to find one of these because I imagine Huffy manufactured them, and they should be around. You can find one in a garage sale or something. It'd be cool to have. Paul Webb, and I talked to Paul about this spacesuit invention, the patent that he had a couple of years ago, and he believes it was pretty close to being adopted. It was a close thing to having it been adopted. And the idea is that pressurized, you're in space. There's the lack of pressure. You have to have pressure against your body to keep the blood in and keep the body functioning. And the way that we all know it ultimately got done is with a spacesuit that has air pressure inside, and you have to maintain that air pressure, the big bulky spacesuit, to keep that pressure on the body. His approach was something different, which is with the fabric and the material in the of the suit. That it was like, this is oversimplification, but like elastic, and that's what provided the tension or the pressure rather than air pressure, allowing you much more movement, ease of movement, and interestingly though, he told me that one of the things he thinks sunk this originally in the 1960s when the space program was looking at it was that there was they took a film of someone, putting the suit on. It took like 3 people to get it on because it was so tightly. You think of long underwear or something else with high pressure, that this was even more so. But there's some thought that this may be this design or technique or idea may be a spacesuit of the future. It's not totally done. Here's another one that I sort of like. This made Popular Science or Popular Mechanics. I'm getting one of the magazines, and it's a way from converting your Mustang to put a rumble seat in it. Now, I used to own a 64 Mustang, 64.5 Mustang, and there isn't much of a trunk there, so you'd have your knees in your mouth, I'm afraid. But that was the concept. I thought that was pretty cool. Russ Gifford and Charles Clancy, and I don't. Maybe somebody here knows those two. Just one of Chuck Colbert. Yeah, Chuck Colbert's patents. This is just like your iris or your fingerprints are unique, and you can identify people based on that. This one's based on knuckles. Okay, this is the most recent one. This that I've got in here. This was actually written up in the Dayton Daily News maybe within the last year, and it's called Fridge Front. And it's a magnetic sheets with designs that you can put on your refrigerator, your appliances, and Jan Anderson has the patent, and take it off and put something else on if you want to change the look of your kitchen. So, and this is 2007. So, there's many more. We could spend a lot of time, for example, on YSI, and someday we're going to do that on another program. But here's I said Thad Carr, William Carr's invention that got me started on all of this. It's a burglar trap. And you set this thing right in. This is built into right behind your front door. The burglar walks in, steps on these things, and falls in. And because this is all on cables, this little room down here, it snaps the top back up so he can't get out. So he's locked in, and this, I wish I had how it was worded, but this door right here is so at the proper time you can remove the burglar from the door. So I think we ought to look at the businesses in town to make sure there isn't evidence of trap doors right inside the front doors. So that's the program on Inventors and Yellow Springs. I think you can see how creative the town has been since the 1850s at least, and like I say, there's a lot more to the story to tell. So. I don't know what the prize is. I do have a question. Nobody on the Yellow Springs Historical Society board can answer this question. Now, this is not a very good copy, but does anybody recognize this house? This is a Yellow Springs house. A very pretty house, as you can see. This is a very pretty house, but it's sort of a trick question. But it's still, I know the answer, and it's still standing. It's not on Walnut Street. No, this building is still there too. They're both still there. Yep. You got it. This is the house that you just walk through that door right there and you're in. This is and now of course there's a modern entrance right here, and this is the building that Dino's is in.
Oh my God.
Yeah, the walls, the fence is gone, and the portico's gone, but then the shutters, you know, it's really good house. If you tell by the chimneys and this, you just take a look at the end of the gable end of the house.
When was the picture taken?
Probably late 1870s, 1880s. It's one of those stereo views that G.W. Large was a general agent for, and we just found it recently, so I've never seen it before. Okay, so that was just a total aside. Thank you, everybody. If anybody's got any questions, I'd be happy to.
I've got a couple of questions. When somebody submitted a design or a device or whatever, did they have to submit the actual item?
Early on, they had to submit drawings, and they had to submit a model, a working model. So now the patent office got rid of most of those old models at some point, and you can occasionally, they're usually pretty expensive, but you can occasionally find them still with the original tags on them for sale at auctions or things. But
The
you
New
have
York
a
Times
working
keeps
model.
advertising them all the time.
Excuse
The
me?
New York Times advertises
Oh,
those models.
okay.
Then the second question is, almost the majority of those devices that were up for patent had castings in it. Was there any evidence in your research that there were foundries here in Yellow Springs?
No, Agricultural Works was referred to as a machine shop. So my guess, they may have done small castings, but I've never seen any reference to that. So I don't know if where they would have.
Springfield.
Yeah, probably Springfield or Dayton. Anything else? Thanks. We've got someplace where, oh, right there. Yeah, freshmen's in the back. I couldn't see them.